What kind of person screams at a coach in front of everyone, mocking their every word, only to unravel when the world pushes back? Karen Wheeler stood at the edge of Lake Serenity, her voice cutting through the morning mist like a blade, her face twisted in a sneer that made the other paddleboarders flinch. At 42, she carried her weight with an air of defiance, her loud floral swimsuit screaming for attention as much as her words. The paddleboard class was supposed to be a community bonding event, a chance for neighbors to glide across the water, laugh, and learn. But Karen had other plans. She wasn't here to bond. She was here to dominate. The lake shimmered under the early sun, its surface a mirror reflecting the pines and the promise of a peaceful day. Coach Riley, a wiry man in his 30s with a patient smile and sun-bleached hair, stood on the dock, demonstrating how to balance on the board. His voice was calm, encouraging, as he explained the importance of core strength and paddle technique. "Keep your knees soft," he said, "and let the paddle guide you, not fight the water." Karen, already perched unsteadily on her board, snorted loudly. "Guide the water? What kind of hippie nonsense is that?" she called out, her voice dripping with disdain. The other three paddleboarders, Lila, a quiet college student, Marcus, a retired firefighter, and Sarah, a single mom, exchanged uneasy glances. Riley's smile didn't falter, but his eyes tightened. He'd dealt with difficult students before, but Karen was a storm brewing on the horizon. She didn't stop. Every tip Riley offered was met with a scoff, a roll of her eyes, or a loud comment to anyone within earshot. "This guy probably learned this from a YouTube video," she said, her laugh sharp and mean. Lila gripped her paddle tighter, her knuckles widening. Marcus muttered under his breath, his patience thinning. Sarah, who had signed up for the class to find some calm amidst her chaotic life, stared at the water, wishing she were anywhere else. Karen's voice grew louder, her mockery a performance for an audience she assumed was on her side. "What's next? Riley, are you going to tell us to hug the lake?" She laughed again, her board wobbling as she gestured wildly. Riley kept his composure, but the air on the dock crackled with tension. He moved on, showing the group how to turn the board with a smooth sweep of the paddle. Karen interrupted again. "This is stupid. I've been on a board before. I don't need some wannabe surfer telling me how to stand." She hadn't been on a paddleboard in years, and even then, it was a brief, clumsy attempt at a resort. But truth didn't matter to Karen. What mattered was being the loudest, the most noticed. She thrived on control, on making others shrink so she could feel bigger. The group paddled out onto the lake, the boards gliding in a loose formation. Riley stayed close, offering gentle corrections. "Lila, try shifting your weight back a bit," he said. Lila nodded, adjusting carefully. Karen, trailing behind, mimicked Riley's tone in a high-pitched whine. "Shift your weight, Lila," she mocked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Lila's cheeks flushed, and she stared down at her board. Marcus turned, his jaw tight. "Can you just let him teach?" he said, his voice low but firm. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Oh, relax, big guy. I'm just having fun. Someone has to keep this boring class interesting." The water lapped against the boards, the only sound for a moment as the group processed her words. Riley paddled closer to Karen, his voice steady but edged with warning. Let's keep it respectful. Karen, we're all here to learn. She smirked, undeterred. Respect? For what? Your little paddleboard guru act. Please. Sarah, who had been silent, finally spoke, her voice trembling but clear. Karen, you're making this miserable for everyone. Just stop. The words hung in the air, a spark in the dry grass of the group's patience. Karen's face darkened. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Sarah, who she dismissed as a tired, overworked mom. Excuse me. She snapped, her board wobbling as she pointed her paddle at Sarah. You don't get to tell me what to do. I paid for this class just like you. Sarah held her gaze, her hands shaking but her resolve firm. We all paid to learn, not to listen to you bully everyone. The lake seemed to hold its breath, the ripples stilling as the group waited for what came next. Riley intervened, his voice calm but authoritative. Karen, if you can't follow the group's vibe, you might need to sit this one out. Karen's laugh was sharp, almost a bark. Sit it out. You're going to kick me out because I'm not drinking your Kool-Aid. Good luck with that. She paddled closer to Riley, her board bumping his. A deliberate challenge. The others watched, their boards drifting in a loose circle around the confrontation. Marcus's hands clenched around his paddle. Lila's eyes darted between Karen and Riley, wide with anxiety. Sarah's face was set, her earlier fear replaced by a quiet strength. Then came the twist no one saw coming. As Karen leaned forward to jab another insult at Riley, her board tilted sharply. She'd been so focused on her tirade that she hadn't noticed the small wave from a passing boat. Her arms flailed, her paddle splashing uselessly, and with a yelp, she toppled into the water. The splash was loud, almost comical, and for a moment, the group froze. Karen surfaced, sputtering, her hair plastered to her face, her floral swimsuit clinging awkwardly. Help me. She shrieked, her voice no longer commanding but panicked. Riley, ever the professional, extended his paddle to pull her toward her board. But Karen's pride was wounded, and her panic turned to rage. This is your fault. She screamed, thrashing in the water. You set me up to make me look stupid. The accusation was absurd, but it lit a fire in the group. Marcus, who had been quiet, finally snapped. Nobody set you up. Karen, you've been acting like a jerk all morning, and now you're blaming everyone else. His voice carried across the lake, steady and unyielding. Lila, emboldened, added, you've been making fun of everyone. Maybe you're the one who needs to learn something. Sarah didn't speak, but her nod was enough. Karen clung to her board, her face a mix of fury and humiliation. But the group's unity was unshakable. For the first time, she wasn't in control. The confrontation on the water was only the beginning. Karen, still dripping and clinging to her board, refused to back down. Her eyes burned with indignation as she hauled herself back onto the paddleboard, her movements clumsy but determined. You think you can gang up on me? She spat, her voice hoarse from the water she'd swallowed. I'll have you all reported for this. This is harassment. Riley, still calm but visibly weary, shook his head. Karen, nobody's harassing you. You fell because you weren't paying attention. Let's just get back to the dock and cool off. But Karen wasn't interested in cooling off. She saw every word, every glance, as an attack on her dignity. The group paddled back in silence. The morning's promise of peace shattered. Karen lagged behind, muttering about lawsuits and incompetent instructors. When they reached the dock, she stormed off the board, nearly knocking Lila's into the water in her haste. Riley helped the others secure their boards, his face a mask of professionalism, but his hands trembled slightly as he tied the ropes. He'd seen difficult students, but Karen's venom was something else. She stood on the shore, her phone already in hand, typing furiously. "I'm reporting this to the community center," she announced, her voice loud enough to draw stares from a nearby family setting up a picnic. "You'll all regret this." Sarah, who had found her voice on the water, wasn't done. She stepped off her board, her sandals crunching on the gravel, and faced Karen. "What exactly are you reporting?" "That you mocked everyone and then fell in the water. That's not a crime, Karen. But making this miserable for all of us, that's on you." Marcus nodded, his arms crossed. "You've been bullying Riley and the rest of us since we started. You don't get to play the victim now." Lila, quieter but no less resolute, added, "You made fun of me for trying to learn. That's not okay." Karen's face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled for a retort. The truth of their words stung, but she wasn't ready to admit defeat. The community center's director, Ms. Harper, arrived within minutes, alerted by Karen's call. A no-nonsense woman with a clipboard and a reputation for fairness. She listened as Karen launched into a tirade about Riley's incompetence and the group's hostility. She gestured wildly, her wet swimsuit leaving a puddle on the ground. "They pushed me in," she claimed, her voice rising to a pitch that made the nearby family glance over. "They ganged up on me. And she pointed at Riley, did nothing to stop it." Ms. Harper's eyes narrowed. She turned to Riley and the group, her expression neutral but probing. "Is that what happened?" Riley spoke first, his voice steady. "Karen was disruptive from the start. She mocked my instructions, insulted the others, and fell off her board because she wasn't following the lesson. Nobody pushed her." Sarah, Marcus, and Lila nodded in agreement, each offering their account. Karen's face twisted in disbelief. "You're all lying," she shouted. But Ms. Harper raised a hand, silencing her. "I'll need to review the security footage," she said, pointing to a small camera mounted on the dock. Karen's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her face. She hadn't noticed the camera. The group waited as Ms. Harper disappeared into the community center's office. Karen paced, her phone still in hand, muttering about unfair treatment and suing everyone. The others stood together, their earlier tension replaced by a quiet solidarity. They'd stood up to Karen, and it felt like a small victory. But the real test was coming. When Ms. Harper returned, her face was grim. "The footage is clear," she said. "Karen, you were disruptive, and your fall was an accident. Nobody touched you. In fact, Riley tried to help you." She paused, her eyes locking onto Karen's. You also violated our code of conduct with your behavior. I'm banning you from community center activities for 6 months. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't do that, she screamed. But Ms. Harper was unmoved. You signed the code of conduct when you registered. Bullying and false accusations aren't tolerated here. Karen's eyes darted to the group, searching for an ally, but found none. The weight of her actions was sinking in, and for the first time, she looked small, her bravado crumbling under the truth. But the consequences didn't end there. As Karen stormed off, vowing to take this to court, Sarah quietly pulled out her phone and opened the community center's group chat. She'd recorded part of Karen's outburst on the water, capturing her mocking Riley and insulting Lila. The video, though shaky, was clear enough to show Karen's behavior. Sarah hesitated, then sent it to the group, adding a simple message: "This is what we dealt with today." Within hours, the video spread across local social media, shared by neighbors who'd had their own run-ins with Karen. Comments poured in, recounting her past outbursts at the grocery store, the PTA meeting, the neighborhood watch. Karen's reputation, already shaky, began to unravel. The fallout was swift and merciless. By evening, Karen's name was trending in the small town's online forums, each post piling on stories of her arrogance and entitlement. She'd always been a figure people whispered about, but now the whispers were public, amplified by the video and the group's united front. Karen, holed up in her house, saw the notifications flooding her phone. Friends she'd counted on to defend her stayed silent, unwilling to align with someone whose behavior was now undeniable. She tried to post a defense, claiming she'd been set up and humiliated, but the responses were brutal. "You did this to yourself," one commenter wrote. "Maybe try listening next time," said another. The online pylon wasn't kind, but it was honest. A mirror held up to Karen's actions. The legal consequences came next. Karen, true to her threats, contacted a lawyer, claiming defamation and emotional distress. But her case was weak. The community center's footage and Sarah's video showed the truth, and her lawyer advised her to drop the suit. Instead, she faced a counterclaim from the community center for violating their policies and creating a hostile environment. The legal fees piled up, draining her savings, and the court ordered her to pay a fine for wasting judicial resources. Karen's world, built on bluster and self-importance, was collapsing under the weight of accountability. The Paddleboard group, meanwhile, grew closer. Riley, shaken but resilient, invited Sarah, Marcus, and Lila to a follow-up class, free of charge. They met at the lake the next weekend, the water calm and the air lighter without Karen's presence. Riley shared his own story, how he'd started paddleboarding to cope with anxiety, how teaching others brought him purpose. Sarah opened up about her struggles as a single mom, finding strength in the group's support. Marcus, usually stoic, admitted he'd been ready to quit the class until they stood up to Karen together. Lila, the youngest, found her voice, her confidence growing with each paddle stroke. They laughed, shared stories, and glided across the lake, their boards cutting smooth paths through the water. Karen's absence was a relief, but it also sparked reflection. Sarah, scrolling through the online comments one evening, felt a pang of guilt. The video had done its job, exposing Karen's behavior, but the public shaming felt heavy. She reached out to Ms. Harper, asking if there was a way to help Karen understand what she'd done without further humiliation. Ms. Harper, wise and compassionate, suggested a restorative justice program offered by the community center. It wasn't mandatory, but if Karen agreed, she could attend workshops on empathy and conflict resolution to lift her ban early. Sarah, Marcus, and Lila agreed to support the idea, hoping Karen might find a path to change. Weeks later, Karen showed up at the community center, her face pale and her usual bravado gone. The workshops were humbling, forcing her to confront her behavior through group discussions and role-playing. She resisted at first, defensive and sharp, but the facilitators were patient. One exercise asked her to write a letter to someone she'd hurt. She chose Riley, her handwriting shaky as she apologized for her mockery and accusations. She didn't expect forgiveness, but the act of writing it cracked something open in her. For the first time, she saw the pain her words had caused, not just to Riley but to everyone she'd dismissed or belittled.